Vernon Woolf is a man who is here to change the world, and he has repeatedly put his money and time where his mouth is. His work helped transform the Soviet Union from a Cold War culture to a peacetime culture. He stands beside Palestinians and Israelis and helps them come face to face and transform their hatred of one another into respect and even love. Meanwhile, he helps the rest of us find our true fullest potential from within our multidimensional mind and spirit. One of the grandfathers of science and consciousness, with a background in physics, religious studies, and developmental therapy, Vernon has the countenance of Santa Claus. With a twinkle in his eye, he strips away our illusions and introduces us to ourselves. So, Vern, you have become known as, in essence, a guru of problem solving on a very grand scale, all the way from individuals to governments. And this could not have been an obvious sort of path that took you in this direction. So can you just tell us a little bit about your background, hopscotching through your original studies that led you to the next, and it'll be obvious in about 2 sentences how you got to where you are right now.
As long as I can clarify that guru means G, you are you. You,
that's right.
So I can go along with that.
That's right.
So I began by taking physics, the hardest classes I could find in university, because I wanted to study pre-med and the basis of reality. That was kind of like my quest. I taught science a couple of years, and then I discovered that teaching science didn't necessarily make that much difference in a person's life. And I knew there was something more. So then I went into education, and then I went into, well, I guess I did the science and the education at the same time. Taught science, and then I went into religious education. Thought, well, maybe I can do this out of religion. Starting from the physical realities into the spiritual realities. And that was a lot of fun, and I worked my way through into teaching the honors classes in science and religion at Brigham Young University. And I did that for a while, and then I got into consciousness. And I became aware that as people developed into enlightenment and into different phases of their own spiritual development, there was some kind of order going on. And I got interested in that. So I took my PhD in developmental psychology. And then I became a marriage and family therapist and opened up a clinic. And then I started looking around for things to do with this, because I had a good therapy practice. And I was applying some of the things from quantum physics and developmental psychology together into the school of consciousness. And this was at a really early stage in the game where not a lot of people were talking about the words physics and consciousness. It was unheard of. It's like 40 years ago, so it's like there were some people talking about it, but almost nobody had done anything about it. They didn't know how to apply it. It was all new theory. But because of my background in physics, I understood quantum physics. Well, did you have, when you started putting consciousness and physics together, there weren't a lot of guidebooks back in that time, as we just mentioned. Did you have some mentors who had already fused the world of science and consciousness, maybe from prior times, prior decades? Actually, no. To be truthful with you, no. David Bohm probably comes closest to that, and maybe David Pete, because they started doing things that were about science and consciousness, and I knew them both. And David Pete wrote the introduction to my first book on holodynamics. And we were together and had lots of conversations, but I had friends. I had a think tank who was made up of engineers and physicists and quantum physicists, and I was like the consciousness end of things, so I began to see what would apply. So I took some of the premises of quantum physics, like here's a few. One is that everything is connected. Everything is driven by potential, that's another. So since everything is connected and everything is driven by potential, you had to learn, well, how can they be connected and how can they be driven? And then I discovered that there are all these dimensions to reality. But back then, that wasn't necessarily known, at least in the body of science, that there were 10, 11 plus dimensions, was it? No, but we knew that they were there. I mean, Paul Townsend come along and made this great theory out of Cambridge, and about, there being he calls them pea brains. I think it's a great way Paul did that.
But it doesn't mean P-E-A-B-R-A-I-N.
No.
Can you explain it?
P means the number. So P is a number. So it goes like from 1 to, say, if you believe there's only 10, it goes from 1 to 10. But if there's more, then you can add more. And then there's 10 that we can measure for sure, and we know there's others. And then brains, B-R-A-N-E-S, stands for the number of dimensions. It really stands for dimensions. So P
brain.
the number of dimensions.
So
you're using.
what were we saying about our pea brains?
So if you're only using a 4-brain world, you know depth, and you know width, and you know height. That's 3. And you can see motion. So you know there's 4 dimensions you can see right there. So this is called our space-time dimension.
So that takes care of 4 of them. So it looks like we're about 6 to however many shy of our true potential in our functioning. Is that where you come in?
Exactly, because when you understand what the next dimension, if you just take one more dimension, then you can see all kinds of things that you can't see unless you're understanding that dimension. And when you take at least 10, you can solve every problem we have. And it's easy.
We're going to get to that in a moment and talk about where you went with some of this, because it's a fascinating journey. But I just have to ask you this. You were a young man when you started seeing the link between physics and consciousness, a path through religion. How did this come about in your own head? Because it was, they say there is nothing new under the sun, but it was original thought. You didn't have mentors.
Well, I put a lot of things together. So what I did is, I have a background in physics, so I used all the physics and the chemistry, and I had a background in pre-med, so it's like I used the biology. And then it was my reading habits that were, because I love to read, and I can read quite rapidly and understand because I have the basis for it. And then I got into all the religion and the philosophies and took degrees in them so that I would have them, and then studied and taught world religions and comparative religions, and then science and religion, and it became like I was able to gather. My passion was more for how does consciousness emerge? What's the pattern of how we get more conscious, more aware, more enlightened? And so it just became a kind of passion, so I started making charts. And so
connecting the dots.
Yes.
You were one of those that connected the dots early on.
So I took like degrees in these different, so I took the educators, my educational thing, my background with Dewey and all the rest of the educators, and what they were really saying is, how does a student learn? And they had a lot to say about that. But when I got into developmental psychology, people like Piaget and Kohlberg and these people spent their whole lives just looking at how people grow and develop. And so they had these patterns. So I took all the developmentalists and all the philosophers and all the educators and all the science bases and applied it in the framework of a quantum framework. And one night I had a dream. I had researchers working full-time to just bring me information, so I was reading like 5 thick books and at least 100 articles every week, and going through everything known and charting out how to connect, what the dots were so they could be connected. And one night I had a dream. And in this dream I saw a black box. And it was Skinner's black box. And Skinner's intention was that what goes in and what comes out, that's the only thing important. You'll never know what happened in between. And in this dream, just almost out of just pure curiosity, I peeled off the covering on the black box.
What did you see?
I saw this magnificent topology of consciousness, and it included everything I had been studying.
Did that become Holodynamics?
It was one whole dynamic, and so it became Holodynamics, because it showed how all the developmental theorists, whether it's in science or biology or sociology or psychology or whatever field or any philosophy, they all fit within this matrix. And there were 6 major sections in the mind model. And then there was a segment of it that came from one side to the other that was for family belief systems. And here I am, a family therapist, so that made a lot of sense to me. But then there's another one that overlapped, that was cultural belief systems. And I'm thinking, what is all this? And then there's a line that goes between it, cuts through everything, and it's called the holodynamic plane. And this voice said to me, the game in the brain is mainly on the plane. And I'm going, what does that mean? So for 2 months, I listened to this box all day long, and it showed me how everything integrated. It was an integrative experience.
Unbelievable.
It's a topology, mathematical topology. And you know, you can take a topology of anything. It's like a jet. You want to see how it'll work. So you put it in a little wind tunnel, and then you can make a topology of it, and you can change the shape of it, and it'll show you what it'll be like if it was this shape or that shape, but it's always a jet. And so it was that human consciousness became for me a model, a topology, and I call it the mind model.
And it was purely, in essence, you had to have had the background. You had to have put the pieces together and the dots
to make it all
already.
work.
But for it to be downloaded comes from the exact fields that you talk about in all of your work, accessing these higher potentials within each one of us, and you were accessing that potential in you at that time.
Sure.
Can we kind of hopscotch forward a bit as to what happened when you started working? I really love the stories about your work in the prison systems and also working in the mental hospitals and what you were able to do with the patients there. Can you talk a little bit about those days?
Part of the model showed that there's a critical choice path that people can make, and it has different dimensions, but one of the dimensions is physical, and the next one's personal, and then interpersonal, and then social, and then into the living principles, which most people don't know about, but everybody knows about, things like faith and love and things, but they don't realize that those are real informational systems. They're patterns inside of us. And then I got into the universal, the great enlightened minds. But when I started working with my patients in the center, I found out all you had to do was teach them this, and just like that, they could come out of their problems.
And these were people that had pretty severe problems and had been committed into the facility.
Well, not committed, not at first. But then what happened is the ones that found out, they started saying, well, what can we do to use this? And they started picking projects. So one of the projects we picked it was like drug abuse.
Right.
And over half the kids in the high schools were on drugs, so we said, well, why don't we do something about that? A year and a half later, we had wiped out the drug problem in 6 counties. You couldn't even push illegal drugs anymore. If you tried, the kids would look at you and say, does that have a color? And you think, well, what's that? Well, that's the 5th dimension. They would just go into the 5th dimension, and the crime syndicates and the people who push drugs have absolutely no defense against that, because they have no understanding of what's really going on. They're just trying to make money or doing whatever they're doing, and they have no idea what's really driving them, nor how to transform it. So the kids who used to be on drugs cleaned out the problem in 6 cities. So we took that and said, well, now what do we do? Because we kind of worked our way out of a job. So we took another project, and that was the state mental hospital.
Right.
So what we did is we took the families who had what Virginia Satir and Carl Whitaker and some of these great therapists call the identified patient. So they're in the mental hospital, yes? So we taught the families how to do this, how to transform the information systems inside themselves holographically. We're using a holographic dimension. Well, before you know it, like 80% or more, there was more than 80% of the mental hospitals out on the streets with their families. They're all healthy. They've all no longer have any of the symptoms.
You're out of work again.
Well, actually, they kicked us out of work because the governor calls and says, Vern, stop what you're doing. I know why.
We have empty beds in this
place. That's right. We're paid by the bed. You're killing the hospital. Well, let it die. No, you can't do that because we have no alternative. Well, all right, I'll slow down. No, you have to stop because we can't. Anyway, that's a whole
news
story.
Like this doesn't stay quiet.
No, but the psychiatrists totally polarized against what we were doing.
Isn't that amazing?
It's amazing. So I've written a special book called the Therapy Manifesto, and it's like, here's 95 things that you have to know if you claim to be a psychiatrist or anybody in the mental health industry.
Who has this been embraced by?
Well, I haven't published it yet.
Oh, I thought you said you were... Oh, okay. I thought you said it was already out. You've written it, but it's not out.
But I haven't published it yet.
Yeah,
because I'm right in the middle of a major publishing process.
Ah, okay.
Anyway, so I've got 10 books coming out, and that's one of them. And I wrote it because of this, because they need to know
Yes.
So anyway,
Oh,
that's
so it would appear. And then at what point did this sort of move you on to the justice system and working in the
next
penal
project
institutions?
was we had these people come in who were totally tragically, just cataclysmically shut down because of things that had happened in their family. Like one of them had her daughter brutally murdered by her wonderful son-in-law. And nobody could figure out how come. And he's now in maximum security. So we showed her and the daughter, who was married to the son now in prison, or the son-in-law, and we showed the daughter and the mother how to do this. They went to the prison. They had this tremendous experience. Took a while because there was so much suspicion, but they learned how to do it. And they transformed that young man, found out exactly what had happened in him, transformed all the information systems. They have a love now, and he teaches others in maximum security prison how to do that. I could tell you dozens of stories like that. Amazing, remarkable recovery. And that's in the toughest, hardest, harshest environment we have. So it became kind of like, well, is there anything that can't be solved?
And we'll get to this a little bit later, because I want to continue hopscotching through some of the other work that you've done, entities you've worked with, but here we're talking about a subject as complex as quantum physics and multi-dimensions and hyperspace and holographic universe.
Oh, we haven't talked about hyperspace yet.
How can you...
That's another dimension.
What I'm going to ask you before this is over is what you just said. How can you make this so incredibly accessible to people? That this must be where the magic of your work comes in.
Because it's already in every person. It's nothing magical about it. It seems magical, but it's only because every person is already magical. They have a dimension inside of them. Once they access what we call the hyperspatial dimension, that's what people like Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff and the science of consciousness people are calling that dimension. But it's a measurable dimension. You can see its effects. And a 90-something% of reality is in that dimension, and you can see it in everything from gravity to everything. And then you can sense that there's networks of information being processed even before you think. So it's called thought before thought. Mm-hmm. Well, what is that about? And so,
you're somehow changing some of
it's so simple.
Is
Should
it
I tell
really
you how
so
to do it?
Yeah, just come on, let's get to that part, and then
How about just this? Can you imagine just being peaceful, like in a place of peace? Can you imagine a place of peace?
Yes.
Okay, what's it like?
Peaceful.
That's right. So mine's a beach on Maui. That's how I started
Right.
this. And just go to a beach on Maui, and then all of a sudden all the chaos around me just goes away because I'm on the beach and I'm peaceful.
That's mine. Normally it's in the sand, hearing the water,
Right.
lying down, sun
And you can feel it,
beating
you can
down.
feel the
Yes.
sun, you smell the breeze, and
That's
all that kind
right.
of thing. And it's just wonderful, isn't it?
Yes.
Now imagine coming towards you in your place of peace, on the beach or wherever, yourself at your fullest potential. Because you know scientifically that everything is driven by potential. So every set of circumstances is that way in your set of circumstances. So what's the potential that drives you? So what does she look like? Can you tell?
Mm-hmm.
Can you sense what she feels like?
Mm-hmm.
Does she care about you?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Will she talk with you?
Yes.
Well, guess what you just did? Now, was that hard?
No.
She is now your source. Anytime you want to know anything from the hyperspatial dimension, guess who will help you do it? Because she cares about you. Mm-hmm. She knows everything there.
Yes.
Because everything is connected. Guess who it's connected through? Guess who you're connected through? So from a scientific basis, your full potential self is the real you. And in Stephen Hawking's latest book, The Universe in a Nutshell, 2001, he published it. Near the end of the book, like the final conclusion of his view of what's happening in the universe, he shows your full potential self projecting itself onto this space-time continuum.
Beautiful. Simple, elegant, as they say in the world of
physics.
physics.
Shows how the physics confirms everything about that. So 40 years ago, I started introducing people who had emotional problems to their full potential selves.
Just beautiful.
Simple.
Well, this caught on. It went past the prison systems and past the mental hospitals, and pretty soon you're attracting super high-end clients, right? Bank of America,
Yeah, Toyota.
Toyota.
All those people. And it was, and you know, it was good. Boeing was in total chaos when Frank was in charge, and we were doing all this stuff. So we trained all the trainers. And then they went to work and trained all their people, and just within a few weeks, Boeing came back into productivity. It's like the coherence occurred. It's like somebody blew a kind of tuning fork for the choir, and suddenly everybody got it, and they just went back to work. It's like a company so big that it was unmanageable.
Right.
And all of a sudden it became manageable. Now, how does that work? It seems like magic, but it is not, because companies have an information system we call the being of system synergy. It's called the BOSS, B-O-S-S, being of system synergy. And it's just a name for something that occurs naturally in every system.
And you
So you can talk to the boss as well.
You can talk to the
and
boss,
you can
right.
communicate, and so can everybody else. And pretty soon, it's like the San Diego newspaper had an advertisement for an executive. They said, we want an executive that's capable of connecting with the entity that's running this company, and then disseminating that information to everybody in the company. And we'll pay you $250,000 a year if you can do that. That was their advertisement. So I thought that was pretty.
You answered the ad.
No. I was not looking for that kind of job. But I could teach them how to do it.
Yes, yes.
So then we got into all this stuff about, well, what's the biggest problem we've got in the world? Well,
Lack of peace.
it was the middle of the 80s by
That's
this
right.
time. And that was the Cold War. So I said to my full potential self, well, why don't we just, like, we're spending $350 billion a year on this war. So could we do anything about that? And my full potential chuckled and said, okay, is that what you want? Yes, let's do something about that one. And 2 days later, I got a call from Barbara Marx Hubbard. Now, Barbara Marx Hubbard is a friend of mine. We've done a lot of speaking in the same places and things. And Barbara said, well, I'm part of the Soviet-American Dialogues for Peace, and Rama Vernon has arranged for a major commitment from the military of the Soviet Union.
And we're talking brass that's pretty high up there.
Well, these were the leaders.
Yeah.
This is the leaders of the Soviet military, to change from from a war room to a peace room mentality.
Now that's a challenge.
And she said, we don't have a clue what to do, Vern. And I said, well, I think I can handle it. I think I know exactly what to do, because I did.
So this launched you on an entirely new path as you headed to Russia. And you had this incredible meeting with the top brass, the elite of the Russian military during the days of the Cold War, and sitting at a table across from them, in essence, at attention.
Well, they were at attention.
They
yeah.
were. What happened? It's an incredible story. Please tell us what happened from that point on. It really changed the course of events.
I have to go back a little bit to explain how come I knew. Because as soon as I made this commitment to do something about it, people started showing up at my seminars that were Russian.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And then the first man who I could identify as Russian jumped up in the middle of what I was saying and came up to the front of the room, threw me against the wall, put his arm against my throat, and then was going to punch me out. And he's screaming at the top of his lungs in Russian, and I didn't understand Russian, so I just used my processes, just went to my place of peace, called up my full potential self, and then just said, okay, and just stopped him right there. It's just like I looked at him with love and just total presence and said, okay, what is it? And then he realized what he was doing, and so then he switched into Russian. And we had quite a conversation, and he still held me for a while. And then I realized, this man thinks entirely different than I think. And I'm going, oh, how do Russians think? And so it was a challenge. So they started, all these Russians started coming, and 6 months later, I got it. I knew then how they thought. So all of that had started before Barbara, and no sooner did I get it that's when Barbara called me. And so then I knew that I probably could help, because I knew what needed to be done with the Russian kind of thinking. So when the general, they were all at attention, sitting like stern, No eyes to either side or anything, just straight ahead. We came in, no hellos, anything, just rigid, stern, just totally at attention while you're sitting. And all their hats were level. They were in full uniform, so much brass. You're just like, it was amazing, a real presentation of power. Then the man across from me, exactly on time, got up, and there was just four of us, Barbara and I, and then a couple of ministers who, like, woo. And so this guy gets up, and he looks at us, just like with total disgust, and then he takes both of his fists, and he slams them on the table, and he screams, "War is inevitable!" And he does it in Russian, so the translator's translating, and I'm looking over, and these people next to me, including Barbara, were going,
not the way they expected the meeting to begin.
So they're just like, at this point, they're no good because they're already into what I call an event horizon. And they're in defense and surprise. So I just did my little process that I used with my Russian friends, switched into being Russian. Because you have to know your enemy, as some famous people have said, and become your enemy before you can deal with your enemy. And these weren't my enemies, but these were people who thought they were. So I stood up, and I just looked at them with just total disdain. Every one of them, there were about 17 of them, I just took my time and looked at every one of them, then I took both my fists, and I pounded harder than he did, and I repeated it more often, and I screamed louder than him, "War is not inevitable. What is inevitable, sir," and I pointed right into his face, "is that life potential will unfold itself. And your moral and ethical responsibility, sir, is to help yourself, your comrades, your families, your country, and your entire nation to become part of the family of nations to help that life potential unfold. Sir!" And I sat down. Now, none of that was prepared. But it was the thing
I would love to have been there.
that needed to be said. When you know how when you sit down and you kind of sit. When I looked up, his head, all the hats had tilted. That's the first thing my peripheral vision showed me. And his head was down on the table about this far away from it, looking up at me inside my eyes to see who was in there. Because nobody had ever addressed them in the way I had. And I looked at him and I smiled and I winked.
Santa Claus.
And he burst out laughing. And then everybody else, of course, laughed because he was the main guy. And so then they all laughed. And he says, "Ah, yes." And he says this in English now. "Ah, yes, but how does one unfold that potential?" I said, "Now we can begin to discuss this." And we went through a discussion that was fantastic about how the war mentality has no solutions. And how if you get into a peace mind, it's the mind of solutions for unfolding potential. And these are the processes. He was so impressed, and so was I with all of them, that what we did is he became my friend. And then he guided me through all kinds of things in Russia. So he introduced me to the space agency. He introduced me to the academies.
Academy of Sciences.
The Academy of Sciences. They took their elite academy, which is their highest one, where all the heads of all their other academies meet. It's called the Academy of Natural Science. And they made a special academy inside of that academy for the Academy of Holodynamics.
Incredible.
And one day he looked at me and said, "I believe that all the other academies," so I shouldn't maybe talk about this, "all the other academies will be absorbed into the Academy of Holodynamics, because it is the academy of the whole dynamic. And it's what's needed in Russia more than anything else, is the integration of our knowledge."
And this work spread throughout the country.
Well, what happened then is he assigned me to work with different ministries. And so I worked with about 14 ministries. Went through these intensive meetings, day after day, sometimes night after night, and into the middle of the night. And sometimes in the middle of the night, they'd come and get me and take me someplace and have these meetings. And it went on and on and on for like this for months, and in fact for about 8 years or so. And the academicians were so taken by all the information we were bringing them that they said, "Well, we want to begin to sponsor certain conferences on this." So we had international conferences on holodynamics for about 6 years. And every year we'd get together, and One year the academicians brought all the children with all their art. They have this traveling art show, 400 children who travel all over the country and show their art. And you can't ever buy this art because it's the treasure of Russia. But they gave me my most favorite picture of all of that.
Oh. Oh, how sweet. How incredible. What an impact you had on an entire nation. And not only that, it wasn't just governmental levels. You helped through this training. Yes.
I was going to tell you how that worked.
Yeah.
We got with the Academy of the Ministry of Social Problems.
Yes. Right. That's what I was going to go into.
And they said, well, this is unsolvable. We cannot solve our problems. And I said, really? Now to me that's an invitation,
right.
An unsolvable problem. So we looked at what had caused it, and we got back down. It took about 2 weeks to do this, but we got back down into the 7 arenas of alienation. And the original party had said you must alienate the masses, alienate them from information. That's
right.
That's why so many telephones didn't work. No telephone books or anything like that. And then you must alienate them from decision making, and you must alienate them from private property and from private interest. And it goes on and on like this. There were 7 of these major arenas of alienation. And they're implemented so that all of the decisions must be made from a central place. So you look at the social system of Russia, and you could see how a farmer could not go out to farm unless Moscow said it's the day to farm. Then you go out, and if it's raining in your area, you take your tractor out and it gets stuck. Then you come back in and you have 3.5 tractors. Because if it gets stuck, by the time you get back and you get the other one out, and you get it out and it gets stuck, by the time you get the third one out, maybe the rain has stopped. Anyway, they had this formula. I'm telling you what they told me. This is how the Russian farmers explained it on the communes. And they'd go on like this with all kinds of food would have to be taken from 2,000 miles away, shipped into Moscow, and then shipped back, and no refrigeration. So over half their food was spoiling, and on the problems went. The biggest problem, they said, was the fact that 75% of their working force had stopped working.
That's a problem.
They were all on the dole system.
Right.
So everybody got paid the same amount. Well, when you're not working, the country's going broke. So they said, can you fix that? I said, absolutely. Here's how you do it. Because I knew how to do it. All you have to do is teach people that the key to their unfolding is the unfolding of their own potential. Information organizes from smallness to bigness, what they call from micro to macro. Okay? So you look at that and you say, okay, well, if information organizes from micro to macro, why don't we teach individuals how to unfold their own potential? And then they will teach the ones around them. So we began a seminar process throughout Russia. So we did unfolding potential.
And you had everything from people not only getting back into the workforce, but being able to self-heal from cancer and, as I understand, even cases of AIDS and other ailments, physical ailments, not just societal ailments.
The amazing thing is that you cannot have a disease unless there's an information field inside of you that creates the growing of the disease. When you get into the information field, it's made of specific information patterns. I call them holodynes. And so holodynes are causal patterns. They're information systems that cause things to happen. So you look at that, well, where are the holodynes? And then you get into all the biology and the physics and the mathematics and so forth, and we discovered, well, the holodynes are inside your microtubules.
And that's where Stuart Hameroff's work comes in.
Right, and that's where Roger Penrose, and that's where the science of consciousness, they've caught on to that in the last 10 years or so. And we built our first synthetic, virtual microtubule back in the Academy of Holodynamics back in 1996, I think it was.
So you were ahead of the game again on that one.
Well, I don't know. I found out about.
You got to.
I found out about microtubules.
Got to admit that much. Your full potential self is a leader.
Well, I don't know, what I am is a very curious being. And I love to see how you find solutions. It's like, if there's some problem that can't be solved, then I'm just automatically drawn to it because it's such an invitation.
Well, we have a big problem going right now, the subject of terrorism, and it's my understanding that you're going to be going to the Middle East soon. And can you talk about this a little bit, this dynamic?
Yeah, I've been to the Middle East a couple of times already, because back in the 90s, Vernon saw what we did in Russia, because we had programs running in over 100 cities and thousands, and we certified like over 600 teachers to teach. And they went out, and it's just like and they developed these holodynamic centers. And they would teach everybody and the leaders and so forth, and it just made a shift. And, you know, like a couple of years later, communism was illegal.
Right.
So it's like, nobody could dominate them anymore. They didn't need dictatorship. They found out that they had a potential, and it just goes on and on.
It is very exciting.
But terrorism is even simpler.
Care to share
It
any
took
more?
us 8.5 years to work our way through the reconstruction of the Soviet Empire. But terrorism is a little more evasive, but it's simpler. So, how can I tell you this?
Well, I know you can't give too much away about it, but are
Yeah.
you going to be meeting? Will you be meeting with people in key positions?
Oh, yes. And I always do. But see, the therapists in Israel, the Israeli Jewish therapists, have invited me there. Because when you deal with any kind of dynamic, it doesn't matter which end of the pole you deal with. It's all the same pole.
Right.
So the war between the Russians and the Americans was a pole. And the Americans on one side and the Russians on the other. It's the same in the war against the Israelis and the Palestinians. They're the same pole. They come from the same family tree.
Right.
It's like amazing things. So you watch this going, well, how did this all happen? And you can trace it back in a panoramic view of the history and so forth. You can see where the wars all
Cultural and
start.
family dynamics.
Cultural and family dynamics,
Right.
all the holodynes involved. And then you realize the solution is so simple. So we had this meeting in Israel because Rama Vernon and Barbara Marks Hubbard were doing an Israeli-Palestinian dialogues for peace, just like they did the Russian ones, Russian-American ones. So we got over there, and the first day there, we traveled in this little blue bus and visited all the places that, you know, and it was really boring for me, frankly, but it's like, because we had to do it so quickly and so forth. And there were all these graffitis on the walls that had been black painted over. And I said to the driver, what are those? And the driver is Arabic and said, those are the tears of Allah. Those are the signs of the mourning that Allah is doing for His people. So I didn't know what that meant, but anyway, we kept going. And they let us off on one side of the old city. I'm going through the old city, and two cars, and I got so interested in all the stuff that the group got kind of ahead of me, and we're not supposed to leave, by the way. We're not supposed to ever talk to Arabs, and it's 11 o'clock curfew, and you're shot after 11 o'clock without any questions. So it's like real war rules we're in. And I got separated because these two cars tried to pass, and there wasn't enough room for me, so I stepped in a shop. While the cars are passing, I turned around and looked. It's as big as Mervin's. It's a huge store, just with a little door. And it's all old stuff. Jars 8 feet tall. A big old well in there. And clothing and jewels, just all kinds of ancient stuff. Some of it 4,000 years old. It's a real, authentic shop. Well, I forgot all about the rest of the people. And
You were going antique
This guy
shopping
comes up to
now.
me and he says, how can I help you? And I said, well, you speak good English. He says, another brother comes up and says, yeah, we got a shop in L.A. They're like
Amazing.
Americans, but they're Arabs.
Right.
And I said, well, where'd you learn English? And they said, well, the one looked at the other and said, we learned it in prison. When were you in prison? He says, since I was 5. And the other guy said, since I was 6. I said, you learned it in prison? He said, well, how do you feel about I broke the second rule, you never so talk to Arabs, you know. I said, well, how do you feel about the Israeli occupation? They both at one time raised their hands like this. We hate it! And then I knew it was a holodyne, and it's a collective one.
Right.
So it's part of the collective consciousness. I said, what color is it? They looked at me and said, what? I said, what color is the hate? See, I went into the holographic dimension.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they both looked down at this thing in the floor, and they said, why, it's a great beast. And it's black. And then they started to shake, and then they both dropped down behind the counter and the counter shook. They were so frightened it took me about 45 minutes to an hour just to get them calmed down enough so that I could talk with them. But I immediately went down and sat right beside them and took hold of both of them. Mm-hmm. I stayed in my place of peace, and they're just. And finally, they came out and they said, "It's the great beast. We cannot look upon the beast. We'll lose our souls if we look upon the beast." And they meant it.
Oh,
now these two guys,
programming, yeah.
yeah, they've been, you know, they're what you call terrorists now,
Yes.
right? These are guys since 5 and 6 years of age.
Yeah.
And you think, okay, so how can we approach the great beast that they cannot look upon? Mm-hmm. And it was so simple. It took us about an hour and a half to figure out. Because we tried this and that and it would. Anyway, we got down to, how does Allah feel about the great beast? Oh, well, Allah loves everything. Well, how can Allah love the great beast? I don't know. So, do you think if you wrapped yourself in the love of Allah and looked through the eyes of Allah, you might be able to discover what is lovable about the great beast? They thought about that. Well, maybe they're pretty adventurous guys, you know. So they decided to do that. They wrapped themselves in the love of Allah, looked through the eyes, they peek up over the counter, they look back down on that piece of floor, and then they said, "Oh, Allah loves it. So ask it what it wants. What do you want?" And then they both went, and then they dropped back down again. It took me another 30, 40 minutes. Got them back out of that. I said, "What does it want? It wants to consume us." "Oh, great. Okay, great. What will happen if it consumes you?" "Well, we don't know." "Well, ask again." "Okay, what else do you want?" "We want to consume all of Palestine." They were scared again for only a few more minutes. This time it kind of wore down a little. And then finally they said, "What else?" And they said, and then the beast says, "We want to consume Israel." They look at each other and say, "Israel? How come it wants to consume me, you, Palestine? Yeah, but what about Israel? How come it wants to ask it?" "What else?" "We want to consume all life." And I said, "Well, if it consumes all life, what happens?" Now, I'm still in this holographic dimension, right? It says, "It gets peace." So what this thing really wants is peace. It wants peace. Peace? Yeah, because then it wouldn't have to have any conflict, because life causes conflict, right? Well, do you think this thing's really very mature? Mature? What do you mean? So we had this talk about what maturity is, you know, and how come it's different. And maybe there's another way that it could do this. It could get peace. So then I said to them, "What does peace look like?" "Oh," they said, "that's easy." First they had a little bit of trouble, but they finally got it. Then they said, "So what would it be like if you were in that peace?" Whew! A complete change comes over these guys. They get up and they start dancing around and say, "This is great." I said, "Now, introduce the beast to the peace. It's the peace that I always wanted. Why not just introduce it in your own self first? You're going to organize this from smallness to bigness." They did it. And they became so celebrated because the beast transformed itself into their peace, which they called the river of life. It's a flowing river of endless love and life, and they started to prophesy. And they were up dancing around the room, prophesying things like, "Oh, every foot that is stepped upon this land was brought by God to be here." I'm going, these are these Palestinian terrorists. and every Palestine is but a witness to the nations of the all-powerful unity of everything and everyone. They're going to, I never told them any of this.
Oh, goodness.
And they're coming out with all these amazing things that you could have written down, and they would have been holy books from then on.
Wow.
Amazing stuff out of these two terrorists, right? So then one of them stopped and said, "Who are you?"
Santa Claus.
I said, "No." I said, "My name's Vernon." Vernon. He says, "That's a terrible name. It's not Arabic. Come with us." So he took me back to this well. They said, "This is the well of Faraj. Should not be a well here." So Faraj has been here 6,000 years. My family has been in this, owned this store around it for 6,000 years. He says, "So anything that has a hidden, like it's not supposed to be any water here, shouldn't be any water here. So it has hidden water, you don't know where it comes from. Or a hidden solution, you didn't know where it was. Or a hidden door is called Faraj in Arabic." They said, "We want to give you a new name." So they dressed me up in an Arabic costume with a little plaid turban on me, gave me a staff, and named me Faraj.
Faraj.
And this will be your Arab name. because you give solutions where none are evident. And then my adventures began, because it was after 11 o'clock.
Uh-oh. And I was going to say, meanwhile, back at the ranch, they must have
They
wondered
did
what
not
the
have
heck
a clue
happened
where
to
I
you.
was. And they were worried and everything. And so now the Israelis are in war mode, and it's after 11. And they said to me, well, where are you staying? And I said, I don't know. I couldn't remember. Because I got there so late the night before and got up so early the next morning. I hadn't even looked at it. But I had glanced back and noticed it was some kind of castle hotel. And they said, oh, we know that one. And I said, well, yeah, but how are you going to get me there? Oh, don't worry, we know how to do this. So then here's my first night, and my second night actually in Israel, and we're going down the streets. And there, one guy's going ahead, and the other's making sure we're all safe here. Goes ahead and says, okay, come on. Go. Made it all the way through the old city, all the way into the lighted area, all the way across the street into the hotel. They walked me right to my door. And they said, we would like to do this again tomorrow night at 11. We have something we think you need to do. I said, okay. It's now.
Where were your handlers at this point?
It's now. I never had any.
Just teasing.
Anyway, so they got me the next morning. We got out in the little blue bus again. We're going all over. And I haven't told anybody because I don't want really anybody to know what I'm doing with these guys. And so next night, 11 o'clock, knock on my door. At 11 o'clock. Come on, Raj, let's go. Sneak out, go in this little old car down to the part of the Arab system it's like part of the city is hardly lit because the Jewish people don't let the Arab people have electricity much, so there's very little electricity. Took me to a house that had some, and here it brought me inside, and here's a woman and 7 children, and the oldest is about 14, and she's very frightened, and so are the children. And my two Faraj brothers, I called them Faraj just so they'd be all brothers in the same family. They said, "Where's Hamid?" And mother says, "He's coming." And so in walks this boy. He looks like a high school football player. He's big, and he's husky, robust, and he walks with one foot on its ankle, and both his hands are crunched up like this and held against his chest like this. But he's very intelligent. And my Faraj brother says, the oldest one says, this man is one of the pathological terrorists. He cannot stop killing Israelis. And he's now a danger to himself and to his people. Can you help him? So here I am in the middle of the night, in the middle of the Arab territory, and helping a young man who's obviously had some real trouble. They explained his story. The Israelis killed his father, and they said they killed him for no reason. But we're not protected by law, so there was nothing that could be done. So this young man decided he was going to do nothing but kill Israelis. They caught him. They took him into the desert, and they put him in a place too small to stand up and too small to sit down in the middle of the desert, and they left him for 5 days and 5 nights. But first, they broke his leg, and they broke all of his fingers. And when they said that, the young man showed me how he could bend all of his fingers back and touch his wrist. So it was they were really still broken. And they left him there. And then they came back and tortured him some more. And I said, so how did he feel? And they said, they talked to him in Arabic, and they said, he is totally filled with hate. So then I said, what color is it? And the young Faraj brother says, oh, okay. And he sits Hamid down, and he sits right next to him, face to face, grabs him by the head, pulls his head over and shouts, Hamid, pay attention, in Arabic. And Hamid, just kind of wakes up to this and just paying attention. And then he looks up at me and says, okay, now what? Asking the color. He says, okay, talk. And he says, it's black. How big is it? Big, a little talk. And he says, oh, it's bigger than the world. It's bigger than the solar system. It's as big as the galaxy. I smiled and said, tell Hamid that's really very good. Hamid, hears that and looks up at me and says, "What?" Because his love is bigger than his holodyne. The young brother gets it. And then he starts furiously talking to Hamid, back and forth, back and forth, and back and forth. And all of a sudden Hamid says, "Oh, oh." And as soon as he did that, his mother and all his brothers and sisters started crying. They knew he got it.
He got it.
And I knew too, and it's like, it was so exciting. I cannot tell you how simple it is to change a pathological terrorist into the most loving human being you could ever imagine. Because when Hamid got it, we made the transformation so that the galaxy-sized blackness became a bigger than that love. So his love was so big, and he glowed with it. And his mother and his brothers and sisters all gathered around him. They all hugged him and everything. And then he came over to give me a hug, and I looked at him and took his hands. And I said, "So what do you want to do with these hands? Do you want to heal them?" And he says, "Oh no. These are my witness to all the people who think they're my enemies, of my unconditional love for my enemies."
Unbelievable.
Sorry, it's true.
And this came through purely.
Purely.
Wow.
No coaching, just a pure state of transformation. By the way, in the middle of that whole process, we were besieged by truckloads of young men who came and slammed the doors and started shouting and screaming out in the front. And Hamid and my two Faraj brothers went out and they handled them. The mother finally went out and also helped, but it took half an hour. So right in the middle of the transformation, the opposition came to find out what was going on, because you can sense it in the entire field, because we are connected. And anybody who's a terrorist is me, and anybody who's an anti-terrorist is me, because we're all connected. But you have to get into another dimension of reality to understand that. So what we teach is, what's reality? And what are these dimensions? And what happens when you get in them? And how do you use that additional awareness of reality in order to solve problems? So every problem is caused by its solution. And the reason that every problem is caused by its solution is because of the covenant. We know from science that everything is made of little spinners of information, that they come from hyperspace, that even when the DNA is coded and created, it's created by spinners from hyperspace. And they come and they create the little places where the protein strings grow and then bridge. They do that in every case where there's a bridge. So you can see that hyperspace is actually creating your DNA. So anything you inherit and anything you have modeled for you and anything that goes on in your life, past, present, or future, is all a part of a covenant. And what is the covenant? It's our agreement. We're holographic beings, and we've agreed that things will look the way they do, and we'll experience them the way we do, so that we can have a vacation from knowing, a vacation from happiness, a vacation from loving one another, and come to a place where there is no love and there is no happiness and there's not any knowledge and everybody's living in aggression and downdraft dynamics, so that we can solve it all. It's like we wrote our own scripts. So if you've got a really, 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 really tough problem, congratulations, it means you have a really, really, really good solution. And to me, that's reality. And it proves itself true. I'm the kind of guy that goes out and says, well, it couldn't be true in this case. You can't wipe out the drug problem. Yeah, you can. And we know how to do it. You can't wipe out disease. Oh yeah? You can cure any disease.
Vernon, you're an unbelievable human being, and thank you so much
for
taking
the
time.
But if you get to know it, it's not...
The nice thing is, it is believable.
Oh, good.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks. Thanks for having me. It's wonderful.
For more information on this incredible man's work, check out his website. He has devoted the better part of the next year to teaching workshops around the world and has a number of books ready to go into print. Until next time, thanks for watching.